RFK Jr. lies to you. Here's one of the more subtle ways he does it. RFK Jr. lies a lot. It's just what he does. He's one of those people who can cram 6 to 10 lies into a statement that's no more than 4 sentences long, and that's often him just warming up in an interview. There are a lot of people out there who have worked on pointing out the errors and lies of RFK Jr. in great detail, but like all good grifters and con artists, RFK Jr. lies in more ways than just the obvious ones. Sometimes he uses an old con artist trick of lying to you without actually lying to you, or rather not actually saying what you think he is, and using that as a hook and a bit of misdirection. I'm going to walk you through an actual example of RFK Jr. doing this, and then explain not only why and how he's using it as a lie, but why doing what he does shows he's either a liar or a clueless idiot. Quote, "I worked for years to reduce mercury and toxic chemicals in fish, and nobody called me anti-fish." End quote. That was RFK Jr. earlier this year in his confirmation hearing. It wasn't the first time I'd heard him say that, but it might have been the first time it got national coverage. That line is an interesting form of how expert con artists and grifters can lie under oath without saying something that will get them later jammed up for lying, but can still be used to set the hook in the mouths of the gullible or the uninformed and pull them wherever the grifter or con artist wants them to go. As RFK Jr. tells it, he was, when younger, eating a lot of ocean fish for health reasons. It was affordable, contained healthy fats, was relatively low in calories, wasn't loaded with sugar, and packed a good protein punch. If you were into fitness in the era he sets his story in, you were also probably eating a lot of tuna for those reasons. Eventually, about the time the scare around mercury and tuna broke big in the media, he started feeling sick, having a series of chronic physical issues and suffering exhaustion and brain fog. He went to his doctor and discovered that he had far more than the recommended safe levels of mercury in his system. This news made him determined to be part of the movement to get mercury out of the ocean fish sold on our market, and he devoted quite a few years to this. He then throws out his line, a bit of, quote, common sense and, quote, folksy wisdom, end quote, that just sounds like it makes so much sense. Quote, "I worked for years to reduce mercury and toxic chemicals in fish, and nobody called me anti-fish," end quote. Then, with the hook set, he launches into an attack on others. Those people, the shills, the paid big pharma doctors on the take, and the others are the real evil. They're attacking him as an anti-vaxxer when all he wants to do with vaccines is exactly what he wanted to do with fish. All he wants to do is make people safe and healthy. The problem with this statement is that it's not something that anyone who knows what they're talking about with regards to either mercury and fish health scare or the topic of mercury and vaccines would ever say. Or, well, again, they do, and they want to lie to you. I'll explain why in 4 parts with a bonus nuclear 5th part. 1. Not all mercury is created equal. Mercury is kind of an umbrella term. There are multiple forms of mercury differentiated from one another by their chemical makeup. It's a little bit like alcohol. You could sit around knocking back shots of scotch with your friends and be fine. You wouldn't be so fine if you did the same thing with rubbing alcohol. It's all alcohol, but the different alcohols have differing chemical compositions that impact how your body reacts to them. On the matter of tuna versus vaccines, we are talking about 2 different forms of mercury that react differently in your body. The scare around tuna, mackerel, and other ocean fish was due to a mercury known as methylmercury. Methylmercury is considered to be one of the 2 most toxic forms of mercury, the other being dimethylmercury. On top of its high toxicity, methylmercury can easily cross cell membranes and accumulate in living organisms. Oh, and it can take about 70 days for just half the dose you ingest to leave your system. The type of mercury found in some vaccines, but not all of them, is a form of mercury called ethylmercury. Ethylmercury is toxic, even if it's not as toxic as methylmercury. Like methylmercury, ethylmercury can cross cell membranes and accumulate in living organisms. However, if you ingest ethylmercury, it only takes 3 to 4 days for half of it to leave your system. The rest will mostly go not long after that. Some of it will convert to inorganic mercury and stay in the body longer, the length of time depending on where it settles, but it will eventually leave. It's removed from your body by your kidneys, but it can also be found in your stool. So, if you eat something with methylmercury in it, It can take up to 70 days for just half of it to finally leave your system. With ethyl mercury, it takes a few days for most of it to do the same. This is referred to as the half-life period. As long as you're not repeatedly ingesting it, you can eventually clear it from your system. Thus, the problem with mercury in tuna and other ocean fish. This leads us to 2. Dosages and frequency of exposure. For various reasons, ranging from economic issues and tuna's affordability to athletes finding it a great high-protein, low-fat and calorie snack, a lot of people were eating a lot of tuna back when the mercury scare around tuna and other ocean fish happened. People were eating tuna multiple times per week, sometimes multiple times per day for prolonged periods of time. If you were eating tuna contaminated with methyl mercury almost every day or every single day of the week after week, month after month, you were ingesting multiple doses of methyl mercury at a rate faster than your body would be able to remove even a single dose. The result is that you would build up toxic levels in your system. No one, literally no one, receives multiple vaccines every week, sometimes multiple per day, for months on end. And what's the overall difference? If you were eating canned light tuna multiple times per week, especially if you were a school athlete eating several cans a day on some days, you could easily have been ingesting over 100 micrograms of methyl mercury per week. If you were eating canned white tuna, you could have easily been ingesting over 400 or even over 500 micrograms of methyl mercury per week. By contrast, if it even has mercury in it, a vaccine contains about 25 micrograms of ethyl mercury. To give you an idea of how that works out with something almost all babies ingest, breast milk has about 0.5 to 1.0 micrograms per liter of mercury in it. On average, babies consume about 22 to 27 liters of breast milk per month. Do the math. That's 11 micrograms on the low end and 27 micrograms on the high end. And that's primarily in the form of methyl mercury and inorganic mercury. A vaccine might deliver a larger single dose of mercury than a single can of light tuna did, but it's largely gone from the body within a week. Meanwhile, in a week of regularly eating tuna, especially if you were lower income and stretching a budget, or you were a student athlete, you were every week ingesting 4 to 20 times the mercury you would get from a vaccine, and you were ingesting a form of mercury that was more toxic and had a roughly 70-day half-life in your body. Because of that, it was easy to eventually reach dangerous levels of accumulated methyl mercury in your body by eating tuna and other ocean fish on a regular basis. You were eating higher dosages with regular repeated exposures. Vaccines, not so much. That leads us to the related but side topic of number 3. Scary words are actually meaningless. A part of how RFK Jr. and others pitch this, once they have the hook set in, is by frequent use of scary buzzwords like toxic, toxin, and toxicity. Because, hey, scary words, right? But those words and their various synonyms are useless without also addressing number 2 above, dosages and frequency of exposure. How meaningless are they? You know how grifters like Food Babe like to yell about how you shouldn't eat anything with chemicals in it, but literally everything is and is made up of chemicals? Guess what? Everything you put into your mouth is technically toxic. Water, a chemical compound at high enough levels, can be toxic to your system. Taken at high enough levels, your daily multivitamin can be toxic. Cinnamon and nutmeg can be toxic in high enough levels when repeatedly consumed and can lead to liver damage. Your weekly round of drinks with the gang? Well, alcohol is definitely toxic. Enough so that we can see over 2,000 cases of deaths from alcohol poisoning in any given year. Words like toxic, toxin, and toxicity have meaning, but that meaning is built on multiple factors that you have to look at and evaluate. Grifters and con artists like to use those words and others like them, not as words with actual value and meaning, but rather as scary buzzwords meant to shape a narrative. Don't let them scare you. 4. The mercury in vaccines sort of isn't. Here's something we all learned at least a little bit about in school, but most of us never had a day-to-day reason to keep up with it in our workaday world and post-school lives. It's a little bit of chemistry. When you take two or more chemicals and they bond together, they become something that's new. That new thing is called a compound element or a chemical compound. The cool thing about chemical compounds? They can share little to nothing in common with their parent chemicals. There's one in particular that we all know, and people even joke about needing it on a really hot day. That'd be H2O, otherwise known as water. Water is made up of hydrogen and oxygen, neither of which is liquid in natural states, and they won't help you hydrate on a burning hot day. They also don't work as well as water at putting out fire. But mercury is highly toxic, right? That's what you're now saying, right? Okay, let's discuss something a little more toxic. Chlorine is pretty toxic. It's toxic enough that it can kill you, and various militaries tweaked it with little effort to create chlorine gas, a weapon banned by treaties because various countries decided that killing thousands of people on a battlefield was okay, but killing them that way was unacceptably cruel and inhumane. In its natural state, depending on the form, sodium can be toxic. When chlorine and sodium meet and bond on a 1-to-1 level, they become sodium chloride, or NaCl. We call that sea salt and table salt. Ethyl mercury, if it's even in a vaccine, is part of a compound element known as thimerosal. Thimerosal is used to prevent bacterial contamination in a vaccine. Thimerosal is a bit like water and table salt in that the sum of it doesn't act and react exactly like the parts that it's made from. But even if the ethyl mercury did, most of it would be out of your system rather quickly, and the rest would eventually leave as well. But you don't even have to worry about that. Why? 5. Nuclear bonus. Mercury is no longer in most vaccines. The above reasons are largely about just exposing why RFK Jr.'s cute little comment is a deliberate form of deception. But this one largely nukes the entire argument he and others make about vaccines and or mercury. In 1997, the FDA Modernization Act required the government to evaluate mercury in childhood vaccines because of the fear-mongering by grifters and con artists and the worry that they would impact the vaccination rates needed to protect children and the general population. By 2001, they had found alternatives to thimerosal to prevent bacterial contamination in vaccines and had removed thimerosal from most vaccines. You can still find thimerosal in multi-dose vials because it's the best thing we have for preventing contamination. When you repeatedly put a syringe into a vial, you run a greater risk of getting bacteria or fungus into the vial. But as many vaccines come in single-dose pre-filled syringes these days, they don't need thimerosal. This is something that grifters like RFK Jr. and other woo pushers really don't like to talk about because it cuts their big fear-mongering about vaccines off at the knees. If the cause of autism is the mercury in vaccines, yet few vaccines have had mercury in them for over the last 25 years, how have the rates of autism gone up? Less mercury in vaccines means the rates would go down. The truth about why they're going up is a simple fact that liars like RFK Jr. like to claim is just a canard thrown around by pharma shills. But it's not a canard. It's the flat-out truth. In recent years, most recently in 2013, the definition of autism was changed and broadened. Asperger's was no longer a separate diagnosis and became part of the autism spectrum. So all of the numbers for Asperger's was suddenly added to the totals for autism. ADHD and autism were not allowed to be diagnosed on the same person before 2013. Because of what they did not know, the two diagnoses were considered mutually exclusive. You had to pick one, but you couldn't be diagnosed with both. The medical community learned more, and as a result, starting in 2013, some individuals who had ADHD were also diagnosed as having autism and ADHD. Thus, the number of cases instantly went up. There are other examples just like these. And yeah, Medical science has gotten better at diagnosing it. If you catch more cases of it and catch them earlier on, it increases the number of diagnosed cases and the number in younger age groups. Which is why we are now seeing the rush by grifters, con artists, and woo peddlers to blame Tylenol, acetaminophen, for autism. Even the Maha followers will eventually figure out the facts if they're in front of them and spelled out in giant neon letters. So now, with even some of the Maha people figuring out that there's less mercury through vaccines out there, they have to find a new grift to push onto the gullible. That grift is fear-mongering acetaminophen. So that's the common lie technique that involves not actually lying. It's a bit of folksy wisdom and common sense that just sounds totally legit if you don't think about it or you don't know the basics of it. Then the con artist uses it to set up the hook, reel you in, and pull you away from the facts and truth and towards wherever they want you to end up. Quote, I worked for years to reduce mercury and toxic chemicals in fish, and nobody called me anti-fish, end quote. And no one who actually knows what they're talking about would ever seriously say that to you. Anyone who does is proving one of two things about themselves. Either they have absolutely no clue what they're talking about, and you shouldn't trust their supposed quote-unquote expertise on the matter, or they do know, but they're trying to deceive you with a classic con artist grifter bamboozle. It's up to you to decide which of those RFK Jr. and the others are, but those are the only two choices you have.